First I have to say, I'm really excited to have you as a guest because this thing happens sometimes in the improv community. You're like, oh, well, this happens anywhere. You're like, oh, that person looks fun. That person looks cool. I hear nice things about that person.
Oh, that's so
but
nice.
You don't really have an excuse to hang out with that person or chat if you're not really like crossing paths. But then when you have a podcast, you can be like, hey.
Now you've got an excuse.
Now I have an excuse to hang out.
And you don't have to make them dinner or anything.
No, yes. There's no dinner.
You made me some homemade chamomile tea.
I didn't even pick it. My husband picked it, so... This is a treat.
Great, yeah. You have no effort whatsoever. And I saw you the first night I came back to Chicago, and I just was jet lagged, and I wanted to stay up as late as possible. And the annoyance thing was happening, and I was able to go and stay up late and watch your great stand-up about birds.
Oh, God. I have a bird phobia, everyone. This is what we're referring to.
I don't know if we talked about it that night, but I wanted to say, I mean, I think people who keep birds are weird. People who keep birds, it's like, what creature could be more? I mean, we've domesticated dogs, but here's a bird literally in a cage that wants to fly out into the world, and you're keeping it entirely for your own amusement. I think it's
Ron, I can't agree with you more. I feel like it's just as mean to keep a bird in a cage as it would be to like take a fish out of water and like put it on some sort of like life support and be like, I'm going to keep this fish alive in this space. It's like, surely that's what it's got to feel like for a bird.
Very, very similar. I mean, only if we could ask.
Yeah. And I will say this, that people who have birds, they're a certain breed.
Yes, they are a certain breed, but one thing's for sure, they do appreciate their birds, for sure, because I think they deep down. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I'm not really analyzing them that deeply.
Yeah, you are.
But they know what they're doing. They know.
Oh, that's sick.
They know what they're doing, and they got to feel a little guilt. So let's appreciate it to alleviate the guilt, maybe a little bit.
That's so sick.
My mom kept birds.
I'm glad I didn't say anything worse.
Yep.
So you are a psychologist, a doctor of psychology.
Yes.
In Bulgaria.
Yes.
Which is, I want to get into both things.
Great.
And specifically, community psychology. Is that what I understand?
Yes.
That's your world?
Yes. So I got my degree late in life. In 2014, I graduated with a PhD in community psychology from DePaul University. Go Blue Devils. And but yeah, I had not done really anything academically for most of my life. But when I decided to go back to finish my undergrad and then go on to grad school, psychology just kind of seemed to be the normal thing.
What were you doing? What were you doing before that?
The longest stint that I worked was as in IT for a global investment bank that was based. Their headquarters was at the Board of Trade downtown. Oh. And throughout the entire 90s, I'm old, but throughout the entire 90s, I worked at this place. And it was a great, amazing place to work. It started as a small derivatives house, and it kept being acquired by larger and larger Swiss banks. And then eventually it became UBS, Union or United Bank of Switzerland.
Okay.
And most of the people that I worked there and grew up with there are left and gone on to bigger and better things or smaller and better things.
Yeah.
But it was a great place to work. So that's, and prior to that, I worked in IT and programming and software testing and so on. And so at the bank, I had been there for 10 years, which is a long time any place, but it was a long time in investment banking. And I wanted to I was burnt out. And I wanted to do something different. I knew I wanted to travel. And they said, well, you can take a leave of absence, but we don't really support that. But if you quit, we'll give you this severance package for your long service here, and you can come back whenever you're ready. And I said, hell yeah, I'll do that. And traveled to Eastern Europe. And at the time, I did not have a bachelor's degree, but I had this interest in travel in Eastern Europe. I'm a Cold War kid. And when the wall came down, I thought, that's the only place in the world that I really want to see and kind of see what's happening there.
Yeah.
And I expected to go and to sort of get that out of my system. But it turns out I really liked it. I liked the food. I liked the history. I liked the sort of I'm a little depressive person myself. I like the sort of dourness and practicality of people living there. And I also was lucky enough I started in Russia, and I was lucky enough to be invited into ordinary Russian people's homes.
That's a treat. Like, that's a treat to be in another country and get to go into someone's home, so you're getting like a different experience culturally, right?
It's almost the exact opposite experience of how they are in public.
For
in
Russians?
Russia, and actually most Eastern Europeans.
Yeah.
In public, people are dour and a little bit reserved, but in their homes, people have a good time, and they're very generous and very kind, and the food is phenomenal, which I also was not expecting. And so that hospitality was something that really appealed to me. But it started out in public. I sort of saw a lot of people smoking, a lot of people drinking, even like kids, drinking. And
like when you say kids, like
9, 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
Carrying,
That's young.
2-liter bottles of beer around.
Yeah.
And, in the early 2000s, which is when I went, Russia and Ukraine, which was the other country I visited, were just coming out of the 90s were really bad for most post-Soviet countries. And so when I came back to the United States in 2003, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't want to go back into the corporate world, but I decided I was going to study psychology because that's what it is, in being interested in people and culture. And so that's what I decided to do. And then eventually I found this field of community psychology, which very, very briefly is take a bunch of hippie, radical, Marxist, clinical psychologists who were treating people for depression, anxiety, et cetera, and then sending them back out to live in the projects or be single parents, and said, we could do this all, with unlimited resources, and we'll still not be able to attack the root problems, which is poverty, discrimination, being disempowered. And so this field was founded in the mid-'60s, very much a reflection of the time, to address some of these larger systemic problems. And so community psychology, the most important word is context. We really try to understand people and groups and societies and systems in the context in which they live. So it's very Marxian in that sense, which we're trying to understand the superstructures of how people live, but how it affects their mental health and well-being. And I happen to study people who are recovering from addictions and how all the systemic sorts of things happen that support or detract from those types of things. That's what I did my research, my dissertation on basically halfway houses and how they work here in the United States. And while I was in grad school, the first year of grad school at DePaul in 2007. It seems so long ago, but it's still the 2000s, so it's modern.
That's right. That's how that works.
Every summer, I would go to a different part of Eastern Europe. And that year, I just happened to be going to Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova, and Budapest. And my advisor...
Where's Moldova?
Moldova is a little sliver of a country. It almost looks like a half quarter moon between Romania and Ukraine.
Okay.
And it's a landlocked country. It's probably closer more ethnically to Romania. A lot of people still speak Romanian in Moldova, but they have a strong tie to Russia as well. There's a little sliver of Moldova called Transnistria, which is a breakaway rogue republic that requires a passport to go within this country. And it's probably as close as you can get to going to the old Soviet Union today.
Oh, wild.
As any other place.
Architecture.
Yeah, they've kept everything. There's still statues of Lenin everywhere. There's still, the big, bold Soviet architecture. And there's a Russian peacekeeping mission. They had a nasty little war in the early 90s when things were breaking apart to be part of that old Russian and Soviet system.
And you currently live in Sofia. Does a lot of the old architecture remain, or did it get, like, I went to Bucharest a couple years ago and taught some improv classes.
Oh, that's great.
It was really cool. And, but it was just heartbreaking to know that, like, there used to be, like, very beautiful buildings that they bulldozed. They didn't get destroyed in the war. They bulldozed them just to do like the classic like communist style building. It was
Yeah.
like, oh really? Oh, that's too bad.
So there was never really Sofia was founded really in the 1870s when Bulgaria was liberated from the Ottoman Empire, and so there wasn't an old section to tear down, but there is sort of a imperial style, Western European, some architecture like a palace for the king, and so on. But I understand. Bucharest, which is what you were talking about,
Yeah.
right? It was an old city for a long
Yeah.
time, and they tore huge parts down for the People's Palace, which I'm sure you saw.
Oh yeah.
Giant.
It's isn't it the heaviest building in the world?
It's like the heaviest building in the world. It's the largest.
densest, yeah.
It's the largest.
It goes widely unused. It's like just an absurd amount of like concrete or something to build it.
Concrete and marble, and
It's like it's a monstrosity.
The Michael Jackson story. I mean, it's impressive.
Wait, what's the Michael? Oh, is that what he dingled the baby?
No, that is not where he. It's not where he.
Blanket?
It's
Was
not
that
where he
where he
held
dingled
it.
blanket?
It's not where he held the baby. But when things were opening up, there's a huge balcony. Did you take a tour of this building?
No.
It's
No,
pretty
I didn't.
impressive if you go inside. There's a 2-hour tour,
Okay.
and you see 50 rooms that are just more spectacular and gaudy than the last. And at the end of it, they say, "Okay, congratulations, you have seen less than 2% of this building."
Whoa.
And we will. The last part we'll show you is this balcony, and most famously, Michael Jackson, when he came to do a concert in Bucharest, he said, "It's so great to be playing for you people, fine people in Budapest." And,
okay.
and nobody corrected him.
This is like the Berliner mistake. Huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So but that's the Michael Jackson story. But I like Bucharest, and it's funny. You were there 2 years ago,
Yeah, two springs ago.
so 2019.
That sounds right.
And so Alex, and I know a bunch of the improvisers who kind of started English language improv in Bucharest, and they're a really nice group
What's
of people.
Alex's last name?
Oh, I'd have to look it up on my phone. So there's Alex and I want to say Boyan, and there's a whole group of people that did a festival there in 2018, and it was an international festival. It was their first one, and I went there and met a bunch of people there, took some classes with teachers from all over the world.
Awesome.
I don't think there were any, mostly Brits, some German people, some, I don't know if there were Americans there. Oh, yeah. Endel Sudek was there.
Yeah.
And she taught a couple of her classes. And so, yeah, it was kind of being part of that Balkan group of people to play at and perform there.
So as an improviser and a psychologist, do you feel like do you utilize a lot of both in both worlds, where you feel like there's a lot of overlap, whether an application of like how you use improv in your psychology and vice versa?
Yes.
You want to grab that microphone, just pull a little closer there.
Yes.
Slide the whole thing.
Yes. Should I eat the microphone?
You probably about a hand's width.
Okay. I have big hands.
That'll do
So the answer is yes. Psychology there's a field called applied improvisation that there's a whole separate field. There's the applied improv network that's out there. You can find it if you go search for it. They're trying to apply improv principles mostly to the workplace, mostly to help performance in workplace and to form cohesive teams and things like that. But there's a lot of improv that's being used in schools, and there's a budding research application of looking at the positive benefits of improv for, thinking on your feet, reducing anxiety, and so on. That I know that Second City has their improv and wellness center that is looking at things like that. And so these AIN people are mostly, I'm a little cynical about it because people say, did you know that improv changes your brain? And I'm like,
Everything changes your brain.
Waking up changes your brain, right? Everything that we're doing right now changes your brain. So there's that sort of approach. So yes.
It is true.
It is
does
true.
Change your brain.
And I am interested in that. I've done no formal research on it, but I am interested in how it helps. Mostly how it breaks down barriers between people and fosters trust. And I'll get into that, why that's important in a minute. And then just teaching wise, I'm interested in using improv because, you just get thrown a loop by students. I teach at American University in Bulgaria. It's all English language courses done in an American-style liberal arts facility, but it's students from about half are from Bulgaria, and then the other half are from other countries in the region, Albania, Romania, Ukraine, Russia, and we're getting much more Central Asian students coming in, but almost all former communist countries from the region. And so if you're Greek, you usually don't come to our university, but if you want an American-style education from that region, we're a good school. We're kind of a second choice because most students want to go to the United States directly. But they all speak great English, and it's really, really interesting because in a typical psychology class of 32 students, there'll be anywhere from 8 to 13 different countries represented.
Wow.
And it's gold dropped from the sky if you're a psychologist.
Completely different perspectives and
absolutely
context that people are bringing to the table.
Right. How bad does mental illness have to be for someone to earn compassion in your country? It's a question I throw out, and the answer is usually, they can't. They'll never get compassion for their mental illness.
Yeah.
Everyone has stories of an uncle or an aunt or somebody who, everyone knew something was wrong, but they didn't do anything about it.
You don't talk about it.
And part of that is from Soviet times where mental illness was a sentence that was bestowed upon you. If you were a political person who were saying things that was not approved, you would get declared mentally ill and be shipped off to a sanatorium, which was a form of prison at the time. So people don't want to be diagnosed with a mental illness, even if they have one. And just the perspectives on everything is just different. And there's a great talk, commencement speech by I'm blanking out on the name. He committed suicide not too long ago. Who wrote Infinite Jest? David Foster Wallace. He gave a commencement speech that I paraphrase it a lot, that if you ask a fish what it's like to be a fish, they'll tell you a lot of things, but they won't tell you that they're wet all of the time. And that's
because they're in a bird cage on life
they're
support.
in a watery bird cage. But that's what culture is, right? We're swimming in it all the time. And it's why it's called a fish out of water story. But the whole idea is that you take someone, put them in a different culture, and all of the things that you don't notice about your own culture and your own life and your own attitudes are exposed. And that's why.
That's wild. That's so true. You learn about yes. 100%.
And you saw this in when you were teaching in Bucharest. That here's a funny line that I'm going to say in my thing, and it's like. We're looking around. So.
Not to throw Bucharest people under the bus, but there was a funny element where before I start the workshops, I'll usually say something to the effect of just my ground rules are let's make sure the content never feels mean-spirited. So that we're creating a welcoming environment. And I was like, let me give you some broad examples. And certainly these aren't all of them, but if your character you're playing is racist or homophobic or sexist, even if you mean with a satirical bend, it's going to probably make an unwelcoming atmosphere unintentionally even. And so people were like, okay. They all give me kind of weird looks. And then later, one of them pulled me aside and he's like, Johnny, he was like, we don't have problems with those things here. And I was like, oh, like you guys are just like super on top of it. And
Right. You're thinking, oh, you're so woke.
But what he meant was we don't have a problem joking about or talking about those things here. And I was like,
yes.
Oh, it took me like 48 hours to figure out what he meant. I was like, well, that doesn't seem right, but I'll take your word on it.
Yeah. Everything that we would joke about in the 50s is like, that's totally fine.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really a tough thing to, accept, wrap your head around, not be offended by, and it's just how culture is there. Yep. And there is, people are becoming more aware and they're becoming more woke, particularly in the past year. There were Black Lives Matters protests in Sofia. There are no black people in Sofia, but there were Black Lives Matter protests that were also brought in awareness about the plight of gypsies and Roma people there. And they use the word gypsy. And I saw you flinch a little bit as I said that. Roma or Romani is the academic term. Okay. But I have students who are Roma and, they call themselves gypsies.
Oh, okay.
And there's documentaries about schools there that I went to see, and it was the Roma Film Festival, and one was called Gypsy Oxford, and it was a high school that graduated many of their students. And so, and then yesterday I'm reading about they're changing the name of a gypsy moth to something else because they finally have decided within the moth world that to get rid of the racist name of their moths. So
what are you saying, moths?
Moths, like
like a literal moth. I thought this was something I didn't know about. Yeah. I thought this was a psychology thing.
No. I know what a moth is. And so, I mean, what is funny and what people have problems with is very different. Than what we have here. I've coached English speaking people from not only in my university, but people who are in the improv community in Sofia. And they have no problem bringing up things that would not fly here.
I love the way you said that, like, you find out about the environment you're in by virtue of experiencing a new one. Like, I've never thought of it exactly in those terms, even though I'm sure like some version of that I've always realized. But I spent a lot of time in like Germany and like even like getting out of the area I grew up like in the US has been such a has shed so much light on like this way I thought growing up in this interesting world. I lived in a very it's so funny, like my upbringing, it's almost, to me, it's in some ways almost feels as extreme as like a Mennonite or like Amish in the same amount of bubble. It was a very evangelical Christian bubble, and it's like even as an improviser moving to Chicago, there was like, I've been here 11 years, but I was like, you know how many references I don't understand because I grew up listening to like Christian music or wasn't allowed to watch that show, and it's like it's very interesting when that like when you experience the other culture, right, of how you notice how different you were. And then you try to explain to people, you're like, oh yeah, like I grew up in church, and people they're like, oh, I grew up in church, and I'm like, I'm talking about something different.
And I'm sure that there were more than a few improv scenarios where it's an Amish person, character that is going into some place, and people were probably not as respectful as they maybe should have been because of that lifestyle. So, and to be clear, I didn't grow up Amish. I'm just saying that the distinction or Mennonite, just the distinction is that like almost that culturally extreme. Yeah. And the United States is dozens and dozens of cultures. Oh my gosh. So Matt and I, we did 3.5 months traveling in the van this winter and went south. And
we were just like, the thing that struck me was like, this is the most curious thing. We're driving through the entire U.S., right? And we're seeing all these different people. We're seeing like Texans that speak like German and with a
Wow.
Texan accent, you know, and like, it's just like how diverse this place is. And I was like,
Dankeschön.
Dankeschön. Das ist ganz gut for mir. And I had this like revelation of like, oh, everybody here knows who Tom Hanks is. Like, isn't that a weird, like, we have like these common denominators of like celebrity or like certain things we know, and then there is so much diversity outside of that.
Yep.
And like,
Yep.
yeah, we have this common thread. And then like St. Augustine, I was like, I didn't know there was a city that looked like Spain in Florida.
What? That's St. Augustine?
Yeah.
I didn't know that either.
It looks like Spain.
Holy shit.
It's like one of the first cities in the U.S. and it's Spanish and it looks like a completely like an old town city.
Wow.
And you're just coming from like, you're going through Jacksonville, which is like painfully like metropolitan and too sprawled out and looks like it's from like the 80s. And then you hit that and then you hit like Palm Beach area, which is like, I don't have enough money to be here. It's just, this country's so diverse.
It is. It's an amazing place.
I got sidetracked there for a moment, but I would like to talk to you a little bit too about community in general. So, being a community psychologist, over this past year of the pandemic, any observations of specifically in your line of work, whether what you saw in Bucharest and or just obviously we're all global now with the internet, but how community changed and observations you may have had or perspectives as a psychologist.
So I quarantined and sheltered in place in Sofia. We taught all of our classes online, and so I just I had an apartment. My university town is about 100 kilometers south of Sofia, and so I live in both places during the school year normally. But during the pandemic, I just stayed in Sofia, and we did everything over Zoom. And in the early parts of the pandemic, in March of 2020, people hunkered down, and people, did what they needed to do by spacing out, going to grocery stores. They did shelter in place. They when they shut down all the shops and stuff, people said, "Oh yes, we understand what we're doing. We understand why we have to do this," and then pretty much everyone was by April or May when the weather started to turn a little bit. It's like this is done, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to do this anymore. And Bulgarians, I've been told this many, many times. Bulgarians do not like to follow rules. They do not like to follow rules. And in that sense, even though they come from a more collectivistic culture than the United States, in that sense, they're much more individualistic than we are. They'll rebel to rebel
Because they don't want the parameter on them.
They don't want the parameter. They don't. They like getting away with stuff. They don't trust the government. The government is basically run by the same people that ran things during communist times. The latest, the president is the last bodyguard of the last communist dictator, and is not a particularly bright or savory character. They don't really believe what the government is telling them, so if they can get away with stuff, they will. That actually plays into improv and status and stuff later on. Yeah. And so by summertime of 2020, things were pretty much back to normal. So there were a lot of cases in Bulgaria. It was not quite to the point where they overran the medical systems, but it came close. Currently, they have the lowest vaccination rates, I think, in the EU. And so, things are not looking great. What did that do for community? So Bulgarians know how to form community when need be. Yeah. Because of the history during the Ottoman times, and then, of course, history during the communist times. And people did pull together a bit during capitalist times, which is where we're at now. After that, things kind of broke apart. And what the way community is formed in Bulgaria is that if you know people, they're part of your community. If you don't know them, they're just not. They're just not. And it's a and it's a nice contrast, and it's an interesting contrast to the United States, because we form ad hoc communities all the time, whether it be an improv group. You could walk into a room probably anywhere in the world, and if you said, "Yeah, you're gonna do a show with these improvisers," they've studied, UCB or whatever, IO method and so on. It's like, okay, and you would bond with them, and if a scene required you to be a good friend or a loving dad to somebody, you could do it.
Yeah.
Right. So we form these loose bonds that form sort of loose communities all the time, and basically we're faking it.
Yeah, of course.
We'll do it and we'll fake it and so on. But even more serious systems in halfway houses, if you and I moved into a halfway house and we're in recovery from addictions, I don't know you. I may not even like the way you look or anything, but you know what? You stay out of my shit, I'll stay out of your shit. We'll get along fine, right? And we'll probably hang out. We'll hang out in the living room. We won't be best friends, but
we're good at doing.
We'll get along.
The comfortable ad hoc, as
right?
You put it, communities.
Right. And partially that's because we have a long history of property rights here, right? This is how I stay out of your shit. I know it's wrong.
Okay.
I know it's wrong to mess with your shit. You know it's wrong to mess with my shit. That would cross the line, right? But as long as we do that, we'll be fine. And then maybe eventually we'll start to bond over something dumb like sports, or a movie or music,
or you're like into like sci-fi stuff.
Oh,
or
you like sci-fi too? Oh,
you
that's
like
awesome.
adventure films.
Oh my God, those are so great. And then we'll start to like each other.
Yeah,
and it won't take very long. And after about, and we actually have research on this. After about 6 months of living together in one of these halfway houses, we'll form a friendship, and that will be enough to help us recover from addictions, because we'll start to look out for each other. In Bulgaria and in most parts of Eastern Europe, you started grade school, first grade. It was probably a class of people, and you probably stayed more or less with that same class of people from first grade to 12th grade. You may have even sat next to the same person all 11 of those years.
Wow.
And so their view of friendship, and not only because of that, but because of the systems around them, that are not based on trust, your friendships are very deep, and they're long formed, and they're hard fought.
They're probably a little bit more kin to like, you don't lose your friends like you don't lose family, or it's like you're once like, yeah, I sat next to that person for 11 years.
Yeah, I know.
You can't change that. You can't change someone's my brother.
Yep.
Yeah.
They know. But even in family systems here, it's like there are families that you don't talk to.
Oh, yeah.
People and stuff. That's unheard of in Bulgaria.
Yeah. Okay.
Unheard of, right? You don't disown your family, and you don't disown the person that sat next to you for 11 or 12 years, and they know everything about you.
Yeah.
And you know everything about them.
They got too much dirt.
Right? And so when it comes time to get on an improv stage,
okay.
And it's like, and I was fortunate enough to be taught by Jason Schatz. And if you know Jason, he would start every scene with, and remember, you know each other and you like each other. And I would say that to these guys as well. And you're a married couple. Okay, you know each other and you like each other. And it's like, great. And the first thing that comes out of their mouths is like, fuck you, I hate you. Why did I marry you? I want to get a divorce, right? We've been married 20 years. I hate you so much. Stop, time out. You know each other and like each other. It's like, yeah, well, this is how marriages are here in Bulgaria. Really? Your 20-year marriage of your parents starts off, I fucking hate you, and why did I marry you, and your ugly face and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much how it is. Okay, I don't believe you, but okay, let's continue. But again, it's the faking that bond is hard. If that's just not how your culture views bonds.
Oh, when it's not innate, then faking it in on stage is hard.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's really,
even though you're playing the role that, I see.
I can't imagine. And it's like, okay, we're best friends. It's like, what are we best friends about? Okay, I've got to make up.
We didn't sit next to each other for 11 years. What?
I've got to make up so much. right?
Wild.
To do that. But if we're faking friendship, it's like, oh, you remember Mrs. Hinton, right? Oh my God, she was a nightmare, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Right? And
The worst.
Yeah, she was the worst. And she spanked you with a ruler in front of everybody
I
in
don't think
class.
that was legal at that time.
It was, it was legal. And so your example taught us all a lesson. And we could go on from that. And so that would be much more difficult. And I don't know if you saw that in Bucharest.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I definitely. So I got to teach in some other places in Europe too, and one of the biggest commonalities that I just noticed was that like they're not mirroring sketch comedy; they're mirroring plays.
They're mirroring drama, yes.
And so, where I think almost always the majority of improv, long form, whatever it is, we're mirroring sketch comedy, and like that's what I think people have in the back of their head more.
Yep.
So that was one of the biggest differences.
And because of that, they're looking at drama. Drama is about conflict, right? And so they have no problem, having conflict on stage, even from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I noticed that a lot in with my Bulgarian students as well.
I wanted to ask you, when you were with this observation of like, in the U.S. we have a lot of just like ad hoc like groups we form and community. Do you think that is part and parcel of us? Just we don't have strong bonds or communities formed like in our families and where we grew up, and so like we are also just looking for them more frequently too, or not necessarily?
I don't know. I mean, I feel a little, I've never studied American culture formally, but what I suspect is going on is that we're so based on consumerism and the exchange of goods.
Yeah.
And there's a base of trust that must happen all the time. When you go to Trader Joe's, do you think you're going to get ripped off?
No.
I mean, Trader Joe's is what Trader Joe's is. And, the prices are what they are.
Yeah. They don't have sales at Trader Joe's.
They don't have sales. If you ask a salesperson or a stock person what's going on and where things are, they will happily tell you what to do.
And if you know what, and they really don't care what you buy and don't buy. The employees there.
They don't. But they want to facilitate you buying those things. But if you're shopping there, and someone is looking at the coffee that you're drinking right now, and someone pulls it out, and you don't know that person, you would probably have no compulsion going up to them and saying, "It's really good coffee. I drink it every day, and I love it. It's not too dark. It's not too. It tastes a little bit like Intelligentsia, but it's not as strong as Starbucks. You like it. Have a nice day," and you'd walk away. That would be a totally normal encounter. And so
I'll say this, I love those encounters.
I love those too. and that's a very unique American thing.
Yeah.
You cannot. I've learned some Bulgarian. You can't go up to a Bulgarian who's looking at that and say anything like that. They would look at you. They would walk away from you.
That's amazing.
And just turn their back and just walk away. I have tried so hard to have. There's a lot of people in Sofia, especially, who speak English, and I've always tried to, make some sort of fun joke and stuff. In the 5 years I've been in Sofia, that has happened twice.
Where it was received well?
Where it was received well, and then I had a little bit of a bit going back.
Okay.
and had fun with that. And so when I came back here on July 1st, was dropped off from the plane to the apartment that I'm staying at, took a shower, went along the lake. In the hour that I was walking along the lake, I had a dozen nice little conversations with everybody.
Yeah.
Just looking, people were starting to grill, just looking at their grill. People would be tapping on the side of the grill. They'd catch my eye and say, "Oh, I got something for you. You want to come over and have it?" It's like, "No, I'll come back later." Just really nice stuff.
Yeah. And I really do think that stuff is nice and pleasant. However, I will say, like, from my perspective of having spent more time in Germany, like some Germans have said to me like, oh, we don't like that. It's so superficial. It's like, oh, really?
That is absolutely.
I love it.
It is.
I love it.
Well,
Just making chit chat.
You are both correct.
Yeah.
And what you have encountered there is that you are discovered that I am no longer in American water.
Yeah.
And you are swimming in German cultural water. Mm-hmm. And what you do is weird.
Oh, yeah.
And you like it. And who knows how long it would take, or if ever, that would be, if you lived in Germany, you just would know the rules. Okay, just don't do that, especially to this generation of German person or this official person in Germany. You just don't do that. I don't care in Bulgaria. It's like Bulgarians are not very confrontational. They'll just ignore you.
Sure.
And but yeah, I love it too. That's part of what being an American is to be superficial.
Yeah.
To have pleasantries, to do some little bit everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Maybe it is like not deep, but it still feels nice.
It still feels, you get a little jolt.
Yeah.
From that. But it's a very unique thing, and that is our cultural waters that we swim in, and it's I like it. It's nice, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
It's but the effect that it has is on the other end is Bulgarians have and lots of Eastern European countries have this. They have what's called work and travel, and so they fly. Bulgarian university students will come and work in the United States over the summertime. Usually it's some tourist area in Bulgaria. They do a lot in Cape Cod, Nantucket, and those types of places.
Okay. Word spreads, and that's where you go.
That's where you go.
Yep.
And so, and I always ask my students, my psychology students, what did you learn when you went to America for work and travel? And I hear the same thing all the time. Americans lie all the time.
Oh, that's funny.
And first time I heard this, it's like, really, what do we lie about? It's like you go to a party and it's like they'll say, oh, this is great. Let's be friends. Do you want to come out and stuff? They don't want to be your friend.
Yeah.
They just want to hang out with you.
The word friend even means something different.
Friend means very different things, right? And then the other thing is like, well, and most of them work in the service industry. It's like, what did you learn about the service industry? It's like, I had to smile. And why did you have to smile? Because people thought I was angry or mad if I was serving them and I didn't smile. And then what happened then? I didn't get as big a tips.
Yeah.
And so you learn, classic operant conditioning. You smile, get bigger tips. You learn, to smile. And then you probably learn to ask questions, right? And to pretend to be interested in their lives. And they said, yes, pretend to be interested in their lives.
And had they gone back and like continued in the service industry and smiled too much there, like the general public would be like, this is something's off.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want?
Yeah.
What's going on, man?
Well, most likely they would be like, why are you smiling at me? Are you laughing at me? It looks like you're making fun of me. And so they would learn very quickly not to, to turn that off.
So funny. I've definitely come to even realize, even within the context of the United States, how much I need smiley affirmation to feel like everything's all right with other people. And I've, over the years, I'm like, okay, there are some people that this is not how they communicate and it's fine, but it weirds me out. And I'm like, I'm probably on the higher end of that spectrum of like, yeah, everything's great,
Well, I mean, but also you're in the comedy world, you're in the improv world, and the expression of emotion, particularly positive emotion, has it has value, right? And if you're going through Chicago style improv classes, you're taught agree, be positive, don't fight, right? Until you get to the more advanced things and you can sort of justify it more. But yeah, we're sort of trained to get along. And I really do think a lot of that is because of commerce, right? If you went to get your car fixed, buy these microphones and just immediately treated everybody as if they're out to screw you over, right? The wheels, the lubrication, the social lubrication would start to grind a bit. And we're taught to, to make things as easy as possible. But it is complicated. Being here and I'm buying a bunch of stuff. I'm buying stuff from Amazon. I'm dealing with my credit cards. I'm dealing with my getting my driver's license renewed. Oh my God, life here is so complicated. It is so complex compared if I didn't get the paperwork filled out to get a new credit card renewed in Bulgaria. It's like, all right, I'll just live with it.
Yeah. Huh.
My credit rating is going to take a hit because this account is going to get closed. I'll just deal with it. No big deal. Here, it's like, no, I am going to get my credit rating fixed and I'm going to get this opened, and that is not going to be a scar on my my credit rating because other things depend on that. Everything is dependent on everything else.
Yeah. Just owning. So I had a car for like 7 years, maybe more. And then when we bought the van this year and we renovated it, I was like, unbelievable, especially as a Chicagoan, how many continuous things to register and to like renew every year, and parking tickets and validations and smog tests. It's
there's the government is also a consumer of all of our money.
Yeah.
Right. And we support local, federal, and state governments, and they need to justify their existence. So they provide services that you must use. And there's not as much competition, but it is still a service-based. The government is there to serve us and to ensure the safety of the roads, to ensure the safety of the vehicles, to ensure the cleanliness of the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the cultural waters that we swim in.
So is it just the level of commerce is just so lessened that in like Bulgaria, as an example, that's why you're seeing the distinction of like how it affects our social interactions?
Yes.
There's just less of it. So, but even though like when you do have commerce, then it still doesn't feel necessary to like be like,
it's not
how did you like your steak?
Part of it is just the middle class in the United States is enormous. Enormous. I don't know what the statistics are, but I would gather it's probably between 70 and 80% of the population is considered to be middle class in the United States. In Bulgaria, it's much smaller. It's probably 20%. And that's where most of the that's where most of the consumerism is. And I'm not going to point out all of the devices that are in your living room, but you're middle class. Mm-hmm. Do you think most middle class people could afford the things that are just in this room in most parts of the world? Probably not.
Yeah.
And even just having a vehicle is a big deal. So I think when you have a large middle class, there's just a lot of consuming that goes on, and that's what keeps. And we saw this during the pandemic. People stopped buying stuff. What happened? All these essential workers, the people who really kept things going, the baggers, the drivers of the public transportation, all those things. It just became a cascade of all these things shutting down. And when this can't happen, then this can't happen, and this can't happen. And so a place like Bulgaria, where it's a much smaller thing, when, business is closed, but, there was not widespread unemployment because of that, because most of the population is poor, and they know how to survive on very, very low wages and very low service from systems that, we take for granted.
I heard today that the amount of people who overdosed this past year in the U.S. was up 29%.
Yeah, enormous.
Do you, maybe you're not aware of what the facts are in Bulgaria. I'm curious, as we're talking about this, if there's maybe a more of a shock to the American system than maybe other parts of the world because of commerce being affected and because of certain like privileges we had, where if like you're not already living in a middle class lifestyle, maybe the jolt of the pandemic, I don't know. Is there any difference that you noted in being in because you're in the addiction field, right? As far as addiction recovery.
Excuse me.
You want some ice on that?
No, I'm good.
I was gonna say,
I've got plenty.
Throw that ice in there. We can have a clatter.
I really think that. I mean, when you have a lot, losses mean more,
Right?
And so, and there, there's a whole set of psychological research on, and human beings in general are wired to feel more intense emotion from a loss than from a gain. We'll adjust to a gain much easier. You get a 5% raise, yay, 5% raise, and we'll adjust.
You just spend more.
You just spend more, spend a little bit more, and then it's however long after that, it's like, oh, my lifestyle hasn't changed that much. 5% loss, we'll feel it more, but we'll also adjust to that as well. Large losses, however, are traumatic. In economic terms, in materialistic terms, in friendship terms, in isolation terms, in social terms, those things can be traumatic and have real detrimental effects on well-being. And, if you remember in the early parts of the pandemic, it was called social distancing. And people realized, no, we don't want social distancing. We want physical distancing. Okay. And there was a push, and I think a lot of people do talk more about physical distancing than social distancing, because we don't want social distancing. We want social coherence. And psychologically, people found that Zoom and the internet and stuff, those things were just godsends, right? To continue to be connected to people. Finally, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the internet was proliferating during the 1990s, and the promise was it'll connect people, and it'll reduce the distance between people, and it will bond it. And
we didn't start using it till now.
Exactly, for that purpose, we didn't use it until now.
Yeah, that's funny. You're right, because even just the trope of it was almost a trope until last year of video calls.
Yes.
It's something you would see on television. It's well, no one actually really does that. It never really feels convenient, or for some reason we're not taking advantage of it. And then, we had the technology and the ability to do it, just we didn't use it till this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a trope in the 90s. Information wants to be free. And that was the utopian vision of the World Wide Web. And younger listeners, go into a Google search of information wants to be free. It was never going to happen. It will never happen. But now during the pandemic, it's internet use is going to go way, way up. And I think the utility companies here just kind of said, we're just going to give you faster speeds. We're just, we're not going to throttle, the speeds of this. And it's wait a minute, I've been paying extra for this faster speed, and you can literally just flip a switch and just give it away. Oh, so, but yeah, the connections that has happened, people really use technology to connect with family members, to do all the things that the internet was supposed to do in the first place. And that really helped a lot of people. Disproportionately, introverts did much better with this type of social connection than extroverts.
Oh, yeah.
Who need this, connection, this live connection with people. And extroverts are much better at, getting information from people. And staring at a screen turned out to be really exhausting for extroverts because they needed so much more from this sort of thing. So
it was exhausting for me. Yeah.
So there's a bit of research out there that shows that introverts did much better in general during the pandemic because curling up and watching Netflix by yourself on a laptop is our idea of what a good Saturday night is. For you extroverts, that's torture. Get me out, hanging out with people, and it differential. And then whole cultures, did better and worse because of that. And the United States is much more of an extroverted culture, than
ours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Than maybe Japan, let's say. But your question before about rising drug rates and stuff like that. I mean, so you have this extroverted culture that is based on consumerism that needs to go out and express itself through the stuff that we have. And I like stuff. And here's a secret. Pretty much everybody in the world likes stuff. Right?
Right.
It's just that we need...
Ron, you weren't supposed to tell that secret.
No, everybody likes stuff.
All right, we have to bleep that part out.
But, our levels of what enough stuff is varies pretty widely.
Yeah.
And, we don't... I really like those Cheerios, Honey Nut Cheerios. When that flavor came out, that was a radical change. I don't know how many different flavors of Cheerios now, but they're going to keep inventing stuff to make us. Yeah, let's try it. If Trader Joe's comes out with a new coffee that sounds a little, this looks nice, and then the guy next to you is like, oh yeah, I tried that new Trader Joe's coffee. It's excellent. It is excellent. Has a nice You know how this one is kind of acidy, and you'll get into a whole thing. It's like, I'll try it.
Oh yeah,
I'll try it.
This year was a fun accidental shift for us when traveling and having so much less stuff. That when we got back, and I've always been like, I'll tend to be a pack rat and save everything. But I know, I've always kind of known my brain does better with less around and less options and whatever. And when we came back, we were like, it was so jarring because we had probably about the size of a big backpack for the amount of clothes we had in storage, and then one skillet, one fork, each, and we didn't have duplicates of anything really. And then we got back and we were like, we felt it. We felt the clutter, and we really seized on it for about a week and threw some stuff away and gave some stuff away, and we didn't get far enough into it. But we were like, let's try to capitalize on this while we're feeling this shift of back to I'm gonna keep using cups until all the cups are dirty. So why don't I just have one cup? You swam in this other cultural water for a while, came back to your home cultural waters. Yep.
And kind of said, ooh, and became a little fish out of water for a certain amount of time for that, and decided to adjust based on that. And I think that's the gold. That's the value of travel. And there's a Hindu expression, or the farther one travels, the less one knows. And that's what it means, right? The things I think I know, I don't know that I don't know it until I go someplace, and it's like, and you feel it in your bones, don't you? You have that discomfort or that knowledge that something's not quite right. Yes. And you feel it in your bones, and it's uncomfortable, and then you don't ignore it, which sounds like what you did.
Yeah.
And then you did something about it. And I see, walking around Chicago and even in the burbs, there are these little community areas that people leave stuff. And I saw on the side of a building, somebody had written, "We're all in this together." And below that, there was a bin of stuff that people, I'm sure, could take. There was a community refrigerator that was outside. I saw in Oak Park.
Oh, really?
And people just put food in it, put stuff in it. And
that's great.
People could walk over there and grab, if there was something in there that they could use, they could grab, and then probably milk that's close to being, to going bad and stuff like that. But still, if someone else can use it, why not? So in that sense, there probably was because of this thing that we're all living and experiencing in a similar way, there was a forming of some sort of community. Mm-hmm. Now, I watched the riots, I watched the protests, I watched, everything that was happening in 2020 remotely. I don't know what it was like here, but I've talked to enough people to know it felt pretty bleak. this feeling that people are tearing each other apart. You had the president of the United States, saying batshit crazy things every other day. There's so I really don't, but we did not experience that same sort of bleak dystopianness in Bulgaria that you guys experienced here.
Fascinating. I feel like I have a billion questions about community stuff, but we're about an hour in.
Okay.
And this is a stinking delight.
I'm having a good time. I feel like I'm talking way too much.
You're not talking too much.
Okay, good.
God, do you feel so? If maybe I'll just pop one more question. In your line of work, you specifically create communities to help out in certain social situations, whether it's addiction, right? Or do you tend to create, or do you alter communities that already exist and just tweak them and fine tune them with armed with research and?
So in my line of work, there are people who do both of those things, or study communities that already exist, and sort of look at sort of the things that make those communities work, sort of the critical ingredients. And that's what I've done most of my life. So in the United States, there is a system of recovery homes called Oxford houses. And they were founded in the 70s, not by psychologists, but they were founded by a group of recovering people who had been kicked out of their halfway house that was being shut down. And all these people had been in recovery multiple times, and they decided to rent a house together. These are all recovering people who had various levels of experience and employment and so on, but they were recovering from addictions. And they knew that if they became homeless or they had to go home, they were in big trouble because they had all been in recovery multiple times. So they rented this house, and they came up with some basic rules right off the bat. They said, no professionals. We hate those fuckers. we hate everyone. Hates being told what to do. So they said no professionals.
And some people are wired.
Absolutely.
We read what is it? Oh, Better Than Before this year with Gretchen Rubin, and something else. We took some personality tests, and she has different categories of questioners, rebels, the person who likes to be a pleaser and follow rules. And we had a funny conversation of my husband was a complete rebel, and mine came back after I took it was questioner, and I was immediately I don't know about that. And I was like, oh wait, what? I'm literally questioning this result of this. Okay, it's probably right.
Why would you say that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of paradoxes that you hear in the recovery community from people in recovery, and one is that I'm a people pleaser who doesn't like to be told what to do. Right? If you're a people pleaser, you love being told what to do because that's how.
So you're not a people pleaser.
That's how you get approval.
Yes.
Or you're a person who's got grandiosity, but with an inferiority complex. So these people, the three rules right off the bat: no professionals, no maximum length of stay, which means as long as we're paying rent for this house, you can stay there as long as you want. But if you drink and use drugs, you're out.
Are you permanently out, or
no? As long as you're clean, you can come back in.
You just can't be under the.
You can't be under the influence while you're living with other people trying to stay clean. And then all the decisions made within the house have to be made democratically. We need to discuss them, and we vote on them, and so on. Do that, and they rented this house, and they discovered after 6 months, hey, we're still clean, and we're doing this ourselves. And they opened up another house. Fast forward to today, and a lot of other things. There are almost 3,000 of these Oxford houses in the United States. They've had almost 400,000 people go through their system since the 70s. They are in 48 or 49 states. And so I did my research, my dissertation and master's research on what's the things that make these houses work. And they still have these three basic rules. All decisions must be made democratically. You must participate in the maintenance and upkeep of the house. It's distributed equally. Use drugs or alcohol even once, you have to leave immediately. But if you do that, you can stay here as long as you want. And so part of it is there's 5 sort of theoretical ingredients in psychology that seems to work well in these types of groups. One is stress and coping. You're with people who have the exact same problems as you do. You talk about it. It reduces stress. And you learn how to cope with things that, a doctor who has no experience with this, or may be a recovering person, but is not the same person, won't be able to do. Behavioral economics, which is just knowing specifically the consequences of your actions. If you do this, you're out. You do this, you get to stay. And what are the benefits? You get a nice place to live. Social bonds, social control, you get to choose. You have a say in if you are living with somebody who you don't like, well, you voted on that person to stay.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
So social control.
Yeah.
And so all these sort of ingredients, and I'm skipping over a few just for brevity's sake, but these sorts of things seem to, and you learn from people, social learning. These things seem to make these sorts of systems work in the United States. And so when I was in grad school, I had just come back from a trip to Bulgaria. I knew I was going to study these Oxford houses, and I had met with some addiction specialists out there, and they said, "What are you going to study?" And I said, "I'm going to study these Oxford houses." And they said, the natural question came up: "Do you have anything like that here?" "No, but we sure need them." And so, that's just a little planted seed in my mind. I came back here and I would write all these papers. What would it be like to open up an Oxford house in Bulgaria and so on? And a friend of mine said, "You should apply for a Fulbright." And I said, "Oh, that's great. What's a Fulbright?" And a Fulbright grant is to send American students and scholars to another country to do research there with the idea of cultural and knowledge exchange. And so I applied for a Fulbright, got one when I was in grad school, spent my 3rd year at DePaul in Bulgaria. I wanted to look at sort of the critical ingredients of what it would take to create an Oxford house in Bulgaria. And so it's a house, a dwelling, people willing to live together under the system, their ability to earn income, to get jobs, to pay for their own way, institutional support so the government wouldn't shut them down, and then community support. The neighbors, what we call NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? So yeah, it's a great idea. Just don't put it in my backyard.
Yeah.
And so these were the 5 ingredients, and then I added a 6th one later on about leadership. You need somebody to actually do the tending and care and feeding of these systems. And so I came back to the U.S. after my first Fulbright with the answer, yes, you could probably create something like this in Bulgaria, but it's difficult. The norm in the United States is to live in houses. There, people live in like 2 or 3 room apartments, and you need a place where people can live and have a communal space, and a lot of the other things. But one of the good things is that because I had met professionals and people in the government in Bulgaria, they were willing to let an American go over there and create these systems. They were fully in support of me doing that. And so after I graduated, I applied for a second Fulbright as a Fulbright Scholar to go back to Bulgaria and to sort of lay the groundwork, the costs, and to create things on paper to do it. And so it's a long story, and then making it slightly longer. We created one of these Oxford houses in Bulgaria in 2016. It was open it had 4 guys living in it. It was an actual very small rented house, and we had 4 guys living in it, and it lasted for about 7 months before it shut down. And the reason it shut down is because the house was not of suitable for this kind of living, but also we learned that here in the U.S., people that live in an Oxford house, they'll usually also go to AA, they'll go to NA, and those things were just not mainstream or popular over there in Bulgaria. And so after this closure, I sort of said, if you're a psychologist and you're a research psychologist, is what I'm trained to do, everything is data. If it's a success, it's data. If it's a failure or if it doesn't work out, it's also data. And you try to reproduce the system and correct for the mistakes that you made before. And so one of the guys who lived in that original house eventually got sober. And he reached out to me a couple of years ago and said, is there anything I can do? I feel really bad about this other thing. I was like, no. I mean, you did great. We learned so much from your experience. And he says, no, I really want to do something. And I said, well, create another Oxford House. And so last year, during the pandemic, back in November, this guy initiated creating another Oxford House, correcting for all the mistakes that we did that we encountered in 2016 and 2017. By this time, I'm living in Bulgaria full time. I got a job teaching psychology at American University. And so, but it all comes down to these friendships, social relationships. In the United States, we'll accept help from, and this is a radical thing I'm going to tell you. In the United States, we'll accept help from almost anybody.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. We don't need to necessarily know who they are. If somebody sounds like they got their shit together, we'll accept help from them or advice, and we'll learn from them and so on.
100%. Even as much as we seem divided on paper or on social media, when it comes face to face time,
right.
100%.
Right. Even if we bond over, man, did you try that? You tried that barbecue rub that I told you about? And oh my God, yeah, it was so good. And we'll bond over that a little bit. And because of that bonding, we'll bond a little bit more over something else. That's tough to come by in Bulgaria.
And that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, right? With the idea that like your community and your friends are a very specific long-term group.
Yes.
And so to try to create these communities in these Oxford home style places, like
and so
massive factor.
And so what I sort of envision is putting together some of these homes and prepping some of the people who are going to live in these homes by doing dumb improv exercises. Because if you can do dumb improv exercises in front of each other, you can bond over that, maybe a little bit, and start to trust each other, maybe a little bit faster than you would naturally in a home. And also it's fun, right? And fun reduces stress as well. So that's, sort of the interpersonal thing. The cultural thing is that in the this is also going to shock you. I think the United States of America is probably the best place in the world to recover from addictions. You want to know why? We talk about it. We could flip on a TV show and see people in recovery being played on the show or live people on the show. We elected a president twice who was an admitted coke addict and alcoholic. Everybody knew this, and we were okay with it. I mean, there's a fuck up in some other areas of policy, but because of that, we rooted for them. We know the sobriety status of pop stars, actors. When Robert Downey Jr. was coming in and out of rehab, we were all rooting for him to get clean.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when people died of overdoses, like other actors and sports figures, we mourn them, right? And we don't say, oh, what a weak person. We treat it as a disease, and we want that to happen. That doesn't exist hardly anywhere else in the world.
Wild.
And it certainly doesn't exist in Bulgaria. And so, just having people wanting you to be successful, right?
Yeah.
Even people that we hate, we would probably say, "Oh, that's a bad thing."
Yeah.
And so that's a huge cultural difference. And I'll never forget my first when I was doing my first research in Bulgaria. I got into a taxi, and I had this policy: if anyone spoke English and they wanted to know what I was doing in Bulgaria, I would tell them. And this taxi driver spoke English. And he said, oh, so what do you do? And I said, oh, I research addictions and stuff. He goes, oh, do you work with the families and stuff? And I said, yeah, sometimes I do work with the families. And he says, you want to know my opinion? I think they should just be shot. They should just shoot them. And
Oh my gosh.
and I had really good instructors in community psychology who taught me context matters.
Yeah.
And so they taught me what was the next thing. So I asked the next thing a good community psychologist should ask. Why do you think that? And this guy said, because nobody recovers from addiction, right? People send their kids to Spain and stuff, and they come back and they hang out with the same old kids, and nobody gets better. And that was a huge revelation to me, because if you've never seen something happen,
yeah.
why would you believe it's possible for it to happen? It's fairyland.
Yeah.
It's a fairy tale if you believe something will happen if you've never seen it happen.
It all becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does.
There, huh?
It becomes a self-fulfilling. Exactly. And so I'll never forget that. And so I didn't judge this guy. That was gold dropped in my lap. And so, yeah. And so if it's not part of the cultural milieu, right, it's not, you're not going to think it's possible. So that's the whole thing that I try to do, is in as humble and as small and incremental manner as I possibly can. You could go over there or any place and say, "You dumb asses, don't you know that this is just a human thing, and people are able to do this if you give them enough support and stuff." How many people are you going to win over that way?
Not many.
And so I'm committed to creating sort of these small successes, build on that small success, learn from those things, build on a larger success, and then eventually go to the media and say, this is what these people, and these people are the ones who have built it. I just kind of give them some expertise on what I think works and what I think doesn't work. But it's their democratic system.
They have ownership of it.
They have ownership of it. You don't wash a rented car, right? Yep. If you have ownership of it, you will tend to it and take care of it. But in the small project that's happening there now, people ask me, "We want to do this. What do you think of that?" Well, I don't think it's a great idea. We give them people a grace period, where they don't have to pay rent, and we talk these out, and it's learning through experience, but it's great. And I learned so much, and because of that, of knowing what things, the systems in Bulgaria, what they have and what they don't have to support recovery, it makes me very acute of the things here of what supports recovery. And so that's the gold of doing things in one place and trying to do it in another.
Seeing what's missing and
seeing what's missing, seeing what maybe could be tweaked, and so on. So that's really the gold of what I like about doing psychology work internationally.
That's so cool. Let's call it here.
Okay.
What a treat to have you.
It was my pleasure, Johnny. You asked great questions, and I feel it deeper in my bones of why I like to do what I do and what I learned from it. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ron.
And you're a delight.
You're a delight. All right, thank you everybody for listening.
Dance to the middle of the night. Come on, dance, wake up the appetite. Dance to the middle of the